Thank you everyone for joining us. Good afternoon. You are, we are happy to have you here this afternoon. I am Damon Jones, and we are the Du Bois Scholars Institute. Thank you for coming to our summer series, Wealth Matters. We're hosting 3 panels over the course of 3 weeks, where we'll be discussing issues related to wealth, wealth inequality, wealth building in our communities. For those of you who are new to the Du Bois Scholars Institute, this is taking place during the course of our summer institute. The W.E.B. Du Bois Scholars Institute, we are an educational nonprofit. We offer educational programming, both during the summer and throughout the school year. And our focus is on very talented students from diverse communities, and especially underserved communities, who are taking our classes and getting both rigorous scholarly training as well as building their leadership skills. So our ultimate goal is to take these talented students and instill in them a commitment to go back to the communities from which they come and be a part of positive change in greater society. So let me introduce myself very quickly. I am the chair of the board of directors for the Du Bois Scholars Institute. I'm also a former scholar myself, so I'm an alumni from the Institute from 1997. I am currently, well, I am at the University of Chicago now, a professor at the University of Chicago. And currently I'm on leave and working as a part of the Council of Economic Advisors in the White House. Because of that, I have to make a disclaimer that nothing said today that I say reflects the views of the administration. We have today with us 3 panelists. We have Charles Corpening, Lincoln Liebert, and Tanya Van Court. Well, we're very excited to have you all today. I know everyone is eager to get a lot of tips from you guys. So, and we're going to go into deeper introductions in a second with our panelists. Before I continue, though, let me do a couple more logistics and announcements. So we have a live transcript option. You may see that along the bottom of the screen. You can also view the full transcript if you click on at the bottom of the Zoom window, live transcript, and then choose view full transcript. I like to also thank the rest of the Du Bois Scholars team that helped to bring make this event possible. So we have also here today Dr. Boone, who's the founder and CEO of the Du Bois Scholars Institute. And then we have Crystal Watson, who is the senior program manager for the Du Bois Scholars Institute, who's making all of this kind of work. And Dr. Mark Ellis, who's the Dean of Academic Affairs for the Du Bois Scholars Institute, who also helped. And then 2 other research assistants, Alicia Rashid and Alexis Pearson, who also helped us put together materials and do some of the logistics here today. To give you all a sense of what's coming next, we have our Du Bois Scholars here, as well as their parents, faculty, staff, alumni, friends of the program. The students who are participating in our Summer Institute this year, which is happening virtually, usually it happens in person at Princeton University, but as you know, things are virtual. So they are participating in the virtual program. And so they were given a prompt that helped to whet their appetite and get them thinking about the topics that we'll be studying. And so I'm gonna start off with some interaction with the students. Then we will turn to the panelists. I will do some Q&A with the panelists, and then we will open it up to members of the audience to also ask questions. Last week, as a part of our Wealth Matters series, we looked at the origins of wealth. We had 2 economic historians who joined us and talked about the historic forces or factors that led to the types of wealth that we see today in the US and how those differ across different groups, including across racial groups. Today, our panel, Building Private Wealth, we're going to look at the sort of individual level, how does one go about building wealth? Why is that important? What are things that we should know? When should you get started on that type of planning? And so we have experts here today that will help guide us in that respect. And then our final panel next week, which you can register for, we will put the registration link in the chat. Our third panel will be the role of wealth today and in the future. And there we'll be talking about what role wealth plays in society and at large. What role do we think it should play or might it play if we were to be imaginative, looking towards the future? So I am going to begin by checking in with the Du Bois Scholars, and we did this last week. So I'm going to ask some questions and have some of the students chime in. And if you are a scholar who did the initial exercise that we had, raise your hand through Zoom, and then I will call on some of you to give some of your thoughts. I'm also going to, so let me start there. Let me first share my screen so everyone can see the types of questions that the students have. Let's see. All right, so can people see my screen here? Like a document? All right, so students did this activity, and it was called Buy Yourself. And so the students went through a series of questions. They were asked to work with a partner on this, either another scholar or someone in the household. And so let's see, to get everything started, let's ask students to offer and share some of their feedback on this. Okay, so the first question we asked was, how many people do you know who own a car, a house, a retirement account, stocks or bonds in a business? The students answered that, and the person that they worked with answered that. And then the second follow-up question was, which of the previous items were most likely to be owned by someone you know, and which was least likely, and why do you think that is? So let me start off. One of the scholars, the names of this, okay, let's see. Okay, let's see. So Joseph, why don't you unmute yourself and tell us which one of these were most likely to be owned by someone you know?
Okay, so out of all the items, the most likely one that was owned was a house.
Okay.
It was prioritized. It was least likely or should I say least likely or just most likely?
I'm going to go to someone else for least likely. So for you, it's a house now. Okay, let's see. Christina, let us know which was least likely to be owned by someone you know.
I agree with Joseph. Most people I know own a house, but for the least likely, I think I don't know a lot of people who own a business.
Got it. And then, okay, so the third part is, why do you think this is? Why was one more likely and less likely? So let's go to Agastya. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly.
No, you're saying that correctly. So I think somebody would most likely own a house, since that's where you live, eat, you would do whatever work or anything, you would rest. However, you would probably be more or less likely to own a business, since it's actually quite hard to start a business, and many people don't really take chances or survey people to see or find a problem in the world to really exploit and build a company.
Okay, great. So let's just move along. So the next set of questions I asked the students, these were what are known as the Big Five. So this is a common test. It's not a test, but it's a common assessment that people take, and it's designed to see where your level of financial literacy are. How comfortable are you with some basic financial concepts? So can someone, if I lower your hand, you can re-raise it if you want to answer another question, but I'm gonna lower the people I called on. Can someone just discuss what your answer was to question 3, and were you confident in how you answered it, or were you aware of how to answer this question? Let me ask Noah. You can unmute yourself.
Hi. So, I believe that you would have more than $102 because the interest rate is 2%. So you take 2%. So every year you take 2% of the money that is in there. So
Right.
you take 2% from 102, and then 2% from 100, and then 2% from the next amount, which would even 2%. The original 2% per year after 1 year would be more than 102 because of the number E, which is like the amount
Part
of
of the
money.
formula.
Yeah. So
Right. Okay. Great. All right. Let's the second of these big five questions. Imagine that the interest rate on your saving account is 1% per year, and inflation was 2% per year. After 1 year, would you be able to buy more, the same, or less? How about Andrew? Thoughts?
Okay. So if you had a savings account that gained 1% per year and inflation was 2% per year, after 1 year, the money in the account would buy less because the rate of inflation is greater than the amount of money that you are gaining.
Right. So, important thing to know when you're saving your money, 1% would be what's called the nominal interest rate, but then you have to also take into account inflation to know what's known as your real interest rate. So this is the third question that students had. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep going. This gives you a sense of the type of questions that we ask students, and I'll come back and I'll tell everyone the answers. So we asked, there is another question about a mortgage. Let's look at number 7, buying a single company stock. Does anyone, let's see, Jackson, do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm trying to think a little bit about what I think I think it would be a mutual fund would be safer. I don't know what any of those terms mean, honestly, but I think mutual means more. So there's to be more options. So that's safer. I'm kind of just guessing.
Yeah. So that actually turns out to be correct. And then, so for me, the intuition for me is that if you have you think about the saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So if you're going to invest in one stock, then everything that you've invested is going to just be tied to the fate of that one company. For a mutual fund, if it gives the same return, it's going to be less volatile. It's going to move around less because you have a bunch of different companies. Some go up, some go down. Those tend to cancel each other out. And so that kind of gives you less what we call volatility in your investment. Just for people's information, these other questions. If interest rates rise, what will happen to bond prices? So this, I put hard here because this is a little more complicated to explain. But it turns out that bond prices typically will fall when interest rates rise. And the reason is that, if you have money and you invest in a bond, you could be investing that money somewhere else and getting a high interest rate. And so the price that you pay for a bond has to adjust to make you willing to continue to forego what you could get by investing in and earning that interest rate. We had a question here about a mortgage, 15-year mortgage. That usually has higher monthly payments than a 30-year mortgage. And the question is the total interest paid over the life of the loan less? And so that is true that you pay your mortgage off in a shorter period of time and you will have paid less in interest over the life of the mortgage. So those are what are known as the big five. And let me just finish off with these last couple questions here. So question number 8 was, suppose you have $100 and you have a savings account that gives you 20% return. How much money will be in this account after 1 year? Did anybody, let's see, Marcus, do you have an answer for that?
I said there will be $120 in the account after 1 year.
Right, so you have 20% and you multiply that times the base amount, the principal, which is $100. That'll be $20. and you add that on. And so then you will have $120 at the end of that year. The next question asks people to choose between two different accounts. You have $100, you can put it in an account that has a 20% return, or you have a second account that just pays you $100 a year. And the question is, if you're gonna make an investment for 20 years, which account would you choose? Let's see, Leah, what account did you choose?
I would choose the $100 a year.
Okay, and what was your reasoning there?
Well,
Did you have a reason?
well, I knew that like 100 would be more than 20%.
Okay, so yeah, so after 1 year, you would get $20 after 1 year if you put it in the account with 20%. You would get $100 in that other account. Now, question is tricky. The reason why is that when you have an account that gives you an annual return, it has what's called, it compounds over time. So we have to think about compound interest. Okay, and once we do that, it turns out that the first account starts off more slowly, but then it starts growing more quickly. And so after 20 years, if your only goal was to have as much money as possible at the end, you're gonna actually end up with more money in the account that gives you 20%. Not in the beginning, but that thing begins to accelerate. So just for everyone's information, there are this formulas here. The first account after 20 years, it's gonna give you each year $100, so that's $2,000. So you'll end up with $2,100. The other account, this is the formula for compound interest. It's gonna grow at 20% each year, but the money stays in there and it grows. And so you may have been able to calculate this, but you're gonna have about $3,834 after 20 years. So this account actually is gonna grow faster. So this is what's called exponential growth. And so one of the things that causes people with wealth to be able to grow their wealth at amazing rates is this power of what's called compound interest. Okay, so let me we had one other question. So Tanya, I hope you don't mind. I know you were on Shark Tank, and which is a show that my wife and I watch a lot. And we know that you were on Shark Tank, so the students saw how you went on Shark Tank and you stood up against the sharks. And so on this show, Shark Tank, if no one knows what it is, it's a show with some investors, and they look at different potential companies that they can invest in. And so Tanya was on that show. And the students had a chance to watch that video, a little clip. In this show, one of the investors offered Tanya $200,000 for 25% stake in her company. So the question I asked the students, how much does a company have to be worth for that to be a good investment? You may or may not have known how to go about this, but let's see. Sophia, do you have any ideas about what you think that company should cost?
I said that her company would have to be worth $800,000.
Right. So if you did the algebra on that, if I was willing to pay $200,000 for 25% stake in a company, I'm thinking that over time, it's gonna have to be worth 4 times as much for me to for that to be a good investment. Now, there's a lot of other things that go into investing in a company, but this was a lot of times on that show, you hear these offers and you want to know, what does that mean? Is that a good offer, a bad offer? What does that mean about the company? So this is a little bit on that. Let me stop there. Thank you to the students for doing some of these hypothetical questions, and you in the audience. I see there's a lot in the chat too. So this seems to be something that's of great interest to people. So now we're gonna, I'm gonna turn to the panel. I've given you just their names. We don't know much about where they are in their careers right now. And especially for the benefit of students, right now what we're going to do is have each panelist, I'm going to also do this just for the benefit of students, to talk about a little bit about your career, how you got to where you are, with an eye towards giving the students some tips and just some notes on what the roadmap was for you, as we have these students who are still, very early in their education career. They'll be looking toward the future. So we just want to briefly touch on some points. I'll go first, so I'll let you guys go. I'll say the best for last. So like I said, I'm currently a professor at the University of Chicago. I was in a Du Bois Scholars Institute when I was in high school. That was actually the first time that I had met Black professors in the academy. And then I went to college. I went to college at Stanford University. I majored in public policy, and I studied economics. And so after that, I graduated and I went on to graduate school to study economics. And I wanted to go into become a professor and also work in the policy world. So maybe give advice to the government on how to make good policy. So after that, I went to the University of Chicago, where I am a professor. I teach and I do research. So I write research papers. I teach courses. And at times I do work and advise policymakers, like what I'm doing now in Washington, D.C. So those were some of the things along the way that allowed me to get to where I am in my career. I've left out a lot of details, but I want to pass the mic on to you all, so you can let students know a little bit about your stories. Let's start with Tanya, and then we'll go to Charles and then Lincoln. So Tanya, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. My apologies, everyone, that I'm actually calling remotely from a Lyft car, but I will be in a stationary place shortly. So part of why I'm doing that is because I'm a mother of 4 kids, and that's a very important part of my life. And you all should know that, because there are many of you who will be mothers and fathers one day, and it's important for you to understand that that requires balance. The second part of who I am is grew up in Oakland, California. My mom was an elementary school teacher. That really demonstrated for me a woman who was committed to bridging gaps in our community. And so that is what I care deeply about and why I do the work that I do now. I also went to Stanford. I got 2 degrees in industrial engineering. I had no idea what industrial engineers did. I just thought, wow, if I'm an engineer, I can take care of myself and make a good living one day. Once I found out what industrial engineers actually did, I hated it. And so I decided to pivot my career and try to find a path towards things that I loved. I ended up working at ESPN, where I launched ESPN3, which was the first digital video streaming player in the cable industry. This was before HBO Go and HBO Now, and even before Netflix and Amazon. Then after ESPN, I was at Nickelodeon. I ran nickjr.com and noggin.com, some brands you all may have heard of. And after doing that for about 6 years, I went to Discovery Education and helped to lead marketing. So I went from industrial engineer, by the way, to marketing, helped to lead marketing and introduce digital textbooks into classrooms across the country to help kids with multimodal learning. I knew that it was boring for kids to just stare at a white screen all day or a whiteboard all day. And so really wanted to figure out, how do we engage and excite kids and at the same time educate them? I started my current venture, Goal Setter, which is a savings, financial literacy, smart spending, and soon to be investing app created especially for families. Because my daughter said to me one day, she was 8, about to turn 9, "Mommy, for my 9th birthday, I really only want 2 things." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Enough money to start an investment account and a bike." And I thought, if I can get every kid like you to say that, I can change the world. And so I started to be an entrepreneur, not because I really wanted to be an entrepreneur, but because I really wanted to change the world. So I will pass the mic now to one of my colleagues.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks so much. So Charles, yes.
Thanks, Damon. Hello, I'm Charles Corpening, and I want to walk you through what I do. So I'm a senior managing director with Aerial Alternatives. I work with Melody Hobson, John Rogers, and we started a large fund. I am also subject to SEC quiet period, so I have to give you a disclaimer. That's all I can say. So I've started a large fund that focuses on businesses of color. And how I got here was basically what I do is very similar to what you saw when you watched Shark Tank, except we're doing it with larger businesses and companies that are making money of more substance, and they're of larger scale, so that we can invest $100 million to $300 million per investment. And so we're looking to back very talented managers and management teams like Tanya that have a strong vision of growth of how to grow a business. And we provide them money to do that. And so there are a lot of intricacies to the question, is it a good deal to invest $200,000 for 25% of the company? And Damon did it at an extremely high level. And the most important part is how intelligent and how capable and how, do you have alignment with the management team? So the first thing is, are they really competent at what they do? The next thing is, so that's the first C, competency. The second C is character. Do you have a good alignment with who they are? i.e., would you feel good about 5 years from today, people saying they're your partner? Sometimes people can make you money, but they're bad people. So guess what? We don't want to do that. And the last is complete alignment. Once we have alignment around competency and alignment about character, we also want to have alignment around culture. How do we want to drive when we invest for the business to look like? We want our businesses to be very inclusive, in addition to being very successful. So we want to do well while we're doing good. And so we're looking to drive that. And there are many questions we're going to get involved with. But the one thing I want to impart upon everyone on this call is the reason that we invest is to meet family goals and vision and our personal goals and visions. And the capital that you accumulate allows you to bless others and be helpful to others that have goals and aspirations that you want to see succeed. And so I'm going to put a pin in terms of what I do. And then how I got here, I was very young kid, 6 years old, walking in a bodega with my mom. And I looked up and I didn't see anyone that looked like me. It was very answer to a question that was answered earlier that owned a business. And I asked my mom at 6, why don't anyone who looks like us own a business? And my mom very astutely answered, which I actually saw this answer in the chat, was, I think it's two things. One, there's a lack of willingness necessarily to work and invest together. And two, just are people willing to take the risk? And that was the answer my mom gave me. And I told my mom right then, I'm gonna own a store like this one day. And just so for everyone to understand the power of intent, the first transaction I did, the first business I bought was a convenience store chain in El Paso, Texas by the name of Good Time Stores. It was a $10 million acquisition, and I led the financing and equity investment on that. And so the most important part, in addition to get the education, is for you to be committed. That last C of commitment, and for I'd left off when I said the 3 C's, there's a 4th C. You have to be committed. And if you're committed, you will do well. And now I will pass over the mic to Lincoln.
Thanks.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Tanya. My name's Lincoln Liburd. I'm really excited to be here. 14 years ago, I was in your shoes, at least for the scholars. I myself was part of the program. And fast forward probably a decade, well, less than a decade after the program, I was in a position to retire. And I took a very traditional route there, I would say, something that many can do if they're so inclined. So a lot of people have non-traditional paths, but I think mine is rather non-traditional. And today I'm an artist, having rediscovered kind of the joys of my childhood, and what really made me happy. It was always within the art, and I do a tremendous amount of art and consciousness exploration, which is inward, not outward, like it would seem in most things these days. And that's been quite a journey. But my path there, let's see, I grew up I spent a couple years of my childhood homeless. And that was, I think, formative for my thoughts on money. When you open a fridge and there's no food in it, it changes the way that you think of money. And when your parents are always concerned with money, it definitely shapes the way that you are brought up. But I was in a single mother household. And over time, we kind of found, I don't know, our feet growing up in poverty, a single mother household, inner city LA. And when I was a little bit older, I had a chance to go visit my father. And my father, it seemed like money came really easy to him. Well, where my mother, it didn't. And some things were a little strange based on how people might stereotype within society. My mother was a Caucasian, highly educated, very classically trained oboist and teacher, and just almost like a child prodigy. And my father had a 5th grade education, Afro-Caribbean, and what I saw was that society kind of has its statistics and it has a lot of myths and all kinds of things to it. But when it came to my household or my households, none of it really made any sense. So that, of course, opened up a tremendous amount of questions. How does the person with no education have this and the person without, all these types of things, right? And throughout my entire life, there's just been a lot of opposites. And a lot of my life has been about resolving opposites. And I think, it's always helpful to have that type of perspective when going through things, because there are an infinite number of ways to look at anything. So it's at least helpful to have, 2 or more. And the path I went from, my time with the Scholars Program was really formative. It was a really special time for me at Princeton there. I hope everybody kind of gets back on campus soon enough. And after that, and a big thanks to Damon, he really told me about the program. I have notes I found recently talking to Damon about the program for the very first time. And it sounded amazing. So I was so happy to spend that summer. And I ended up going to Stanford as well, like Tanya. And I did industrial engineering. We call it management, science, and engineering. And it has a fancy title. I did a minor in education. I started a nonprofit organization back home in the Caribbean to help kids transform the Virgin Islands, where I'm from, and transform the Caribbean ultimately, because there are a lot of societal challenges, economic challenges, political challenges throughout the region. And I dedicated a lot of time to developing a pipeline to address these types of issues. At the same time, I was a consultant. I went and I consulted the big CEOs of the world at a company called McKinsey and Company. And when you get through college, at the end of it, they're going to be these really intelligent folks that somehow get sucked up by Goldman Sachs and McKinsey. You'll see these names. These are like the plump jobs. So I went out and I did my plump job. I traveled around the world, stayed in presidential suites and the limos and all kinds of things, and I got to see that as well, that extreme, right? From being homeless to sitting down almost every night for like a $5,000 meal, and staying in a presidential suite as a 22-year-old all over the world type of thing. It was eye-opening, because what I realized was none of that is worth it. All the fancy cars, the big houses, for me, it wasn't worth it. So something else had to come in life, and it wasn't going to be the pursuit of material. It was going to be something else. So I didn't know exactly what that was. And I kept going. I knew I needed a transition. I went out to a tech company and did the whole Silicon Valley tech thing. I really loved the product. It was helping provide a voice to the voiceless. I really resonated with that. Was in the wrong role, I think, at the right company, and just stuck it through. And during that period of time, I discovered something called financial independence. And financial independence is the point at which you have enough assets to support your livelihood, the way you live, your expenses for the rest of your life. That really got me excited. And I spent some time putting together a plan on that. And then I pursued it. And within 3 years, I was in a position to never have to work again, which meant not that I wouldn't ever work again, but that I would do everything on my own terms from that point forward. A little under 2 years ago, I stepped away from the traditional workforce and was able to really explore that in more depth, right? Getting closer to who I ultimately am as a person, what my role is in kind of the broader society as a whole. And that's been really, really rewarding. So happy to talk in more details about different things. There's no one size fits all. There's no silver bullet. Life is more complicated than such things, but it's possible, and there's a different path for everyone.
So, as you guys can see, we're going to have a great conversation this afternoon. So, thanks everyone for starting us off. So, the first, let me start with this question. I'm going to open it up to whoever wants to answer it. Everyone doesn't have to answer it. First question I'm want to ask is, and some of you have already kind of answered this, so don't feel free to not have to repeat yourself, because some of this is already covered in your intro. But what does wealth and wealth building mean to you? So why is it important, or why, maybe you don't think it's important, but is it important? And if so, why is it important for people to build wealth, or what does it mean to you?
Hey, go ahead,
yep,
lady.
Go ahead, Charles.
Oh, thank you, Charles. So, I will say that I think it is critical. And I think that it is critical for our community, because without wealth, you don't have power in America. And without power in America, we don't have the ability to do the things that our community needs and deserves, and have had to rely upon other people to provide for us. And so one perfect example of that is my company, Goal Setter. And Damon, you already provided the example of us being on Shark Tank. And we were on Shark Tank and also pitching to a number of other investors, most of whom were white men, because we needed funding. And I needed funding. Again, remember, I didn't want to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to change the world. And what Goal Setter does is Goal Setter provides financial education through the lens of memes and GIFs from hip hop artists and social media influencers and YouTube personalities. So when Beyonce says, "Can you pay my bills? Can you pay my telephone bills?" we use that to explain Beyonce wouldn't need anyone to pay her bills. If she would just save for an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of her expenses, Beyonce could pay for her own bills. And by doing this, we are changing the language and the understanding of wealth in our community and for our kids. But the bottom line is, if I didn't have enough funding as a business, I wouldn't be able to offer Goal Setter to our communities and help to educate our kids and help to close the wealth gap between Blacks and whites. There is an astronomical wealth gap in this country between Blacks and whites, but I couldn't do any of that if I didn't have enough funding for my business. And guess what? When I went out to seek funding for my business, by the time I had raised my first $1 million, 88% of that money had come from Black people, brown people, and women. And so white men, who hold the preponderance of the wealth in this country, would not invest in me. So why is wealth important? Wealth is important so that we can shape and determine our own destiny, so that we can shape and determine what are the products and services and schools and hospitals and institutions that our community needs, and then we can fund those. And artistic centers, right? Lincoln and arts, right? It's all of these things. Nobody else can tell us what arts are important to us if we have the wealth to fund the arts and the healthcare and the institutions that will help our community to thrive.
So,
thanks. And so before, Charles, before you go, I just want to make one point to the audience. We're going to be doing Q&A, but if you have a question that comes up, you can put it in the chat. And then we're gonna note it down. And so once we do opening up for Q&A, I'll return to some of the questions that were not addressed if you want to put it in the chat. So just so everyone in the audience knows, if you come up with a question right now, you can actually put it in the chat, and then we'll read it to the panelists in a second. So just a programming note. Sorry, Charles, go ahead.
No, that's fine, Damon. Just quick for the audience. This is a capitalist society. Having capital is extremely important to be able to drive what you want to do in every area. Let me give you a very clear example of how wealth in Black America changed the landscape in history. In 2006, Senator Barack Obama was running for president. And during that time, the Clintons had basically locked up the Democratic Party. I'm going to say this nicely and broad. I'm not going to be very specific. And so most of my friends of color who were in politics could not fund Senator Obama because it would put them in a bad position with the Clintons. Okay. And so it was very wealthy people in the Black community based in Chicago and elsewhere who were independent and not part of the Democratic power that funded Barack Obama's run for the presidency. I was blessed because of my 30 years in private equity. At that time, it was 15, to have a net worth to be able to help provide capital. And so we had the third largest fundraiser in Princeton that we brought in independents to fund Barack Obama and keep him alive so that he could actually go and have the capital to properly advertise in Iowa. It would not have happened. He would not have been president unless we had the capital to do that. That's why capital matters. You can have the groundswell, but the groundswell tells those with capital you need to pay attention. And so what you want are more people like you to have capital so that you don't have to go knock on doors and compromise too much when you're putting forth your ideas going forward. And so I don't want to give you a ton of different examples. I just wanted to give you that one salient example.
I can go ahead. I'll just try to balance out. So what we're hearing a lot is money and power. I think those are two really important things. Money, in many ways, gives you the power, whether it's at an individual level or at a more systemic level, which is what we're hearing, right, in terms of changing the world and also in terms of moving, political ballots and outcomes. It's all influential in the way that we live our lives. At the individual level, money has the ability to, in many ways, set you free from having to really worry about anything. As mentioned before, it gives you the ability to set your own chart. And it's one thing that doesn't get emphasized when we talk about scale, as is kind of being expressed here. Hundreds of millions of dollars, and I mean, to win an election these days, it's billions of dollars, and being able to put together the groundwork both at individual level, like $5, $25, and also the big donations at the dinners and these types of things. It's a big deal. But what doesn't get talked about often is just how little you might personally need to secure your future for the rest of your life and for generations to come. And it has a lot to do with some pretty basic fundamental principles that could go on the corner of a napkin. I wish I had them when I was 15 or 16, 17 years old, like you guys, but it's easy to get caught up, especially in the US, with power and what that means. I think it's good to go out and try and do the best, but you can't pour from an empty cup, basically. At some point, being able to take care of yourself can be really helpful. The world provides regardless, but it can be really helpful to be in a position where you can create the art that you want to create. You don't have to worry about a benefactor. You don't have to worry about anybody. You can do the business you want to do, even though it's going to blow up, because you believe in it. You can, you have the opportunity to really set your own course, not be, in a sense, owned by anybody. Or, you have your parental setup these days, right? And sometimes there's probably some friction. I'm sure you guys are all great kids and you're following exactly what your parents are saying and you really believe everything that they say, and it's fantastic. And there's no internet, right? We still go to our parents to figure out how to heal our hurt ankle or something like this. We don't go to YouTube for anything. But there's really this I lost my track there, got too carried away, but there's an opportunity for us to basically, put ourselves into a position of influence much earlier on in our careers that then gives us the ability to go out and make the changes that we want without having to worry. When I was in the companies that I was in, I could say whatever. I spent an extra 2 years working even though I didn't really have to. And it's a psychological thing. You guys are probably a ways off from that. But I could basically say whatever I wanted. When deals went through that I didn't agree with, I could just, I could be the activist employee within the company. Like, I didn't care. I had nothing to lose. And I think being in a position like that really gives you the ability to go out and change the world. I know a lot of you have really big hearts. So, when you accumulate your wealth, it's not the end, it's just the beginning of what's to come. And money's not the end point. It's really just the beginning of what's possible.
So Lincoln, just on that, just to pick up on that, you said the number is not as big as we think. What's the ballpark? Not talking about your personal situation.
Right.
The average person wants to be financially independent and retire at age, what did you retired at age 25 or were you 27?
28.
28.
I think.
Okay, it was a little bit of a slacker, but
yeah. Well, I was done at 26, two extra years, because psychologically there's something called 1 more year syndrome.
Okay. Correction, 26. But what's a number that allows you to do that? Not for your not particular case, but just in general.
Yeah. What's most important about finances is realizing it's almost like a philosophical thing at the end of the day. What you decide to spend your money on it's not maybe what the world ought to be, but it's what the world is. And if you want that can of Coca-Cola, you go out and you buy it, and that type of thing has some material consequences long term, whether you buy it or you don't, and these types of things, health, all kinds of things, but we won't get into it. It's related to Damon's question. You might be asking how. Well, there's some things that are really important. We won't have time to go through them all. The biggest word I would emphasize, and if you could take away one thing, it's enough. The word enough. It's really not very present in our society necessarily, but there is a such thing as enough. And in order to ever understand what you actually need in order to become financially independent, you've got to put a stake in the ground, understanding what enough is. If enough for you is being able to travel on a private jet, own one and a yacht, and that's fine. There's a number for that. If enough for you is, being able to support a family, have a 2-car household, there's kind of the where many of us end up, live in a decent neighborhood, send your kids to good school. There's a number for that. If your idea of enough is to live in a hut somewhere, there's a number for that. So the question becomes, what is enough? And at your age, truthfully, you might, in your, deep within yourself, there's going to be this thing that keeps reappearing throughout your entire life, something like your soul or, some form of spirit. It's just going to keep on bubbling up over time. And it's going to tell you whether you're on the path or you're not. And you might ignore it for your entire life, but it's there. It will know what enough is. And your job is to listen, to try and over time learn enough about the way that the world works to understand what enough actually is. And then from there, the math is really simple. It fits on the corner of a napkin. To make things simple, it's just 25 times. So 25 times your annual expenses, not income, nothing like that. Your annual expenses for the lifestyle that you would like to live in perpetuity. And if you can live under that, fantastic. If you can live over it, you're going to be in trouble, but it's just 25 times your current or your future anticipated lifestyle expenses. And that's your number. And you can just save toward that. And over time, once you hit that, that's the beginning. Honestly, it's just like stepping through a door.
Great, thanks. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving along because I think a lot of questions now are being asked. I want to make sure we have enough time. So another question I would ask, and here maybe you guys can just pick one example, but what are some of the most common and basic ways that people build wealth? One example or more about how do people build wealth?
I think that there are, historically, you look at why there is a huge wealth gap between Black Americans, Latino Americans, and white Americans. And you can trace that wealth gap back to a few sources of investments that have enabled other communities to build wealth and have held our community behind. I think one of those, and the primary one, is home ownership. And so home ownership is absolutely a great way to build wealth. But I would just put forth that when you think about home ownership, the very first home that you own should be a 2-family home, or a 3-family home, or a 4-family home. And why do I say that? Because any vehicle that you can purchase that can make money for you instead of just taking your money is absolutely a better way to build wealth. So I, for example, have a brownstone in Brooklyn. This brownstone in Brooklyn literally enabled me to be an entrepreneur because I came out of corporate America. I had savings, I had retirement, I had investments, and I had this brownstone. And so I rented out the top 2 floors of the brownstone, and the people who lived up there paid my mortgage. I didn't ever have to worry about a mortgage when I was an entrepreneur. I lived for free along with my kids. And so, that's one of the ways I think that is most important in terms of building wealth. It is buying a home, but not just buying a home, buying a multifamily home that can generate revenue for you and not just be a place where you are sending a mortgage to every month. The second way to build wealth is investments. And if you look at investments could mean a lot of things. It could mean investing in real estate, investing in the stock market, investing in artwork, investing in your friend's startup company, like many of my friends from Stanford did for me. But just if we take the basics of the stock market is a fantastic way to build wealth that white Americans have used and Black Americans have historically not used as much. About 28% of Black Americans are invested in the stock market. About 61% of white Americans are invested in the stock market. And so we have missed out on the rise of the stock market for decades upon decades upon decades when that compound interest factor that Damon described earlier was growing and making other people wealthy. And so it's really important that we understand how to invest in the stock market early on and understand that saving is not good enough. Saving will never build wealth. It will never make you wealthy. The only way to become wealthy is taking your money and investing it in something that yields a higher interest rate rather than the small interest rate that savings accounts yield. So that's the second way. And then the third way is ownership. And so when you think about ownership is owning your own whatever. And the beautiful thing about ownership is no matter what you love, you can own something in that alley that can make you wealthy. And so I talk to kids all the time. And one of the examples I give is Ryan Friedlinghaus. I don't know how many of you remember Ryan Friedlinghaus, but he was the guy who was on MTV's Pimp My Ride. And so he would deck out all these cars. He owned West Coast Autos so that he would make these fancy cars for the athletes, the entertainers, the celebrities. I'm sure when Ryan was young, his mother was like me, boy, you are out there fixing up those cars again. Please go grab a book. Why don't you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer instead of fixing up those cars? Well, Ryan Friedlinghaus, by virtue of owning West Coast Autos, is worth $25 million. Similarly, there's a young man named Mosiah Bridges. When Mosiah was a teenager, he loved bow ties. And so he made bow ties in his grandmother's living room. And because he owned his own bow tie business, he started to distribute those bow ties through Nordstrom. He did a partnership with the NBA and made bow ties for different NBA teams. And soon his bow tie business was worth $1 million just because he loved making bow ties. And so ownership is a fantastic way of building wealth and can let you capitalize on whatever you love. If you're an artist, owning your art and owning something in that space can make you wealthy, and you still get to be an artist. So those are the three things that I would say: home ownership, but I would advocate for multifamily home ownership, investments, and certainly participating in the stock market, and then owning your own business, whatever that business may be, and around whatever passion you have.
Thank you. So that was an extensive list. So Charles and Lincoln, if you want to add, chime in. If not, we can, we do have we can go on to other questions, but the floor is yours.
Yeah, I just want to add quickly. One thing Tanya said that I really want to emphasize for everyone here is invest in your passion or your friend's passion when you feel that they're competent to be successful in that area, right? See, one of the areas where we as a people have struggled with is the ability to invest, to have capital, to invest in each other. And what you'll find is that many people in our community just have absolutely amazing ideas, but they lack capital. And I get bombarded with ideas on the venture capital side because of the fact that we've had this very public launch. And so people of color are like, I can go to you. And great, but I'm not a venture capitalist. However, I can tell you that there are a lot of people who are people of color who have now begun to generate wealth who have an interest. And so the only thing I would add on to what Tanya's saying is set aside a small amount of capital. So this might increase what you call that, what's the right term, that retirement capital that Lincoln was talking about, because you really do want to be able to help people meet their passions. And I personally get a lot of joy out of investing with young people that have creative ideas. And I would include you in that, Tanya, that have creative ideas to be able to drive business growth going. That's just something that excites me. And so I'm thankful that God's put me in a position to have wealth to be able to do that. And it's another reason why I think you want to generate that, not to run with the Joneses. There's so much stuff that's so much more important with that than that. But one great thing is helping other people satisfy and fulfill a vision that they have is something that gives me personally a great deal of joy.
Now, just add on one thing, just with regards to, well, maybe two things. One with regards to savings, it is true oftentimes that if you're just going to save, it will not take you very far if you don't know kind of where to get your capital to work for you. The idea is to think about each dollar almost as like a soldier in an army. And you can either have them chilling out at the pool, or you can have them out there working for you. And just run with that. It's a little more, whatever, it simplifies it, but that's something. And but I think there's something about saving which is very, very critical. And there's something around discipline, the discipline of saving. And if you were to go to your standard financial advisor, they would tell you, and you guys are like, I don't even know how many of you guys have even had your first job yet. So you got a ways, but hopefully you're taking good notes and you'll come back to this at some point. But basically when you talk to a financial advisor, or even you look out at the news, things like that, I mean, oftentimes you'll hear a really good savings rate, or the amount of money that you put aside after, each paycheck comes in is around 15%, maybe 20% if you were to go to a financial advisor, and a lot of people will target that percentage. But what they don't realize is that it's a very traditional number. And if you weren't really to change too many variables and you just stayed on that path and you were starting at $0, which isn't going to be the case, a lot of people are going to be stepping out of college with maybe $100,000 in debt or something like this, which is scary, but it's the reality in US education. At 20%, you're going to be working for another 46 years if something's not changing. So let's say you started your career at 22, you'll be going till you're 62, and that's the 20% will help you get there. And it's assuming something like around 30, your salary typically evens out and things, but it's a simplified thing, but that's something to think about. And what it also gets to is another exponential product, which is the higher your savings rate is, the less time it takes to get to a position of financial independence. So as you get to, let's say, 70%, all of a sudden we're talking about, and that's a lot for people. I mean, it's to get to such a position, you might have to start thinking about, how do I dramatically restyle my life? It doesn't mean sacrifice. It just means thinking differently and creatively for a lot of people. So 70%, that's 15 years. So from today, I don't have anything. In 15 years, I'm going to be in a position. So if I'm 22 today, starting out my career, I'm putting aside 70%. By 37, I could be done. and you keep going. It's exponential. At 80%, it's 5 years. At 90%, it's 2.7 years. So if you're saving 90% of your income and you feel good about your lifestyle, and you figured out what it is that enough is, and you want to, like, in 2 to 3 years of work, you're in a position to, for the rest of your life, be there. But it starts with savings. And having that amount of capital at your disposal, you'll figure out what to do with it in time, such that you can use it in the future. And then, so that's one point. And the second point I would share is that in terms of investing for, in friends or others, helping them realize that vision, that's beautiful. And anytime you invest in anything, it's about realizing a vision. Hopefully, you're getting into investments where you feel like there's a future and you can really see it. It's beautiful. That's what you're investing in. One thing I would say is that when you think about net worth, which would be that amount, that number, that 25 times the expenses of your future, when you go to budget, you just add in a line item there. When you're coming up with what it's going to cost you to live per year, you just add in a line item, which is investments that you're going to make in promising startups or something like that, right? Promising businesses. And that enables you to know your number without having to change too much of the math. It's just another line item, like gas and a car and a house, these types of things. It would be, investing in friends' businesses, and that'll help you. This is all the same. It's all the same math. You really don't have to take a vision of what your future is in some sense, and understand, we can't own the world, but there's enough to go around for everyone. The pie is very, very, very big, especially with information like we're sharing today across the panelists. This is great.
So let me pick up on one thing that Lincoln is talking about. Another thing that's just of interest to me in this area of financial literacy and sort of building wealth. So for example, Lincoln mentioned saving 90% of your income. So that suggests you could live off of 10% of your income. So the question I want to ask is, in practice, the people that are wealthy in society, that have amassed wealth, that have been able to grow wealth, where are they starting from? Are they inheriting a lot of wealth? What is actually going on behind the curtains? And number one. Number two, people who are self-made, like, is this typically the realistic for someone who has a low level of income? Or is this more so advice for someone who has a relatively high level of income to begin with? Wonder if the panelists could.
I can answer the second piece of that quickly. I talked to a number of people because, of course, they have a lot of friends. Mostly they have questions. How do you do these things, right? Once people know it's possible, like they heard something, wow, okay, do I know anybody? And oftentimes the person that they call and they talk to. One of the challenges, a lot of my friends have decent incomes and these types of things, so it's maybe a little bit easier. But I also put together a model for an electrician or a plumber. And the standard case was, so if you're an electrician or a plumber, you can get started pretty early, 17, 18. I think everybody here is going to college. But the idea is that really this is open to anybody. It's not about necessarily income and these types of things. It's about savings and getting creative. So I had a plumber living in Miami Beach, which, if you've ever been, it's a very, very beautiful place. It's like kind of living in paradise a little bit. And they had they started at 17 or 8. No, they started at 18 years old, and by 30, with funds to support a family, they were in a position to actually be there for their kids as they were growing up, type of thing, right? So they weren't, if that was the number one thing, like being with the kids, they were in the position to actually make that a reality at 30 as a plumber or an electrician. So I went through and looked at all the average wages, thought about all the creative tax efficiency, for somebody who has low income. There are a lot of benefits that exist at that level, like savers credits and different things that make it really, really possible for someone to do okay in that setting, assuming a couple of different things. And it's possible. It's just it comes down to discipline, making the budget and understanding what's coming in at the end of each month, and being able to pay yourself first before you go out and and spend type of thing.
Damon, if I may, you happened upon a question there that's a big part of how wealth is transferred in this country. It's not just real estate. That's a huge advantage from one race to another. It's also the advantage of, can you afford to assist your young people as they are starting out in their careers? So I'll give you an example. I started at Payne Weber on the mergers and acquisition side. I knew I wanted to get into private equity. I knew I wanted to own businesses, but the first thing I needed to do is first figure out how to value them, i.e. what should I pay? So getting back to that question of fairness, how much should I pay for the company? And then the second thing I needed to do was I needed to get money, right? I had to work somewhere to generate this capital. And so from my perspective, the folks that I was working with who happened to be Caucasian, they had parents that were actually paying their rent. Well, my mom could not afford to pay my rent. And so I had to pay my rent. That's not a bad thing. I work. So, that's what we need. That's what, we just have to understand that difference. And so there was a question in the chat just recently of, should we offer to, have our kids work with us, live with us, I should say, for a couple of years to build up wealth? And my answer would be absolutely. If I could convince my young men, I was blessed with 5 sons, if I could convince them to live with me, I would have done that. But then it gets to ego, desire to be on their own, all that sort of stuff. There are trade-offs. And I would just say, us parents, because now I'm on this side of it, we would be very hopeful and thankful of getting our young people to live with us because we have extra space, and have them help get ahead of the game, build up this capital. But if they don't, be in a position to help properly subsidize, for instance, those first couple of years out of school, for 2 reasons. 1, allows them to build savings, and 2, allows them to better pursue their passions, right? We want our young people to be in a position where they're doing what their heart calls them to do. Lincoln, you were in a position, you sort of had to build wealth yourself before you did that, and that's great. But to the extent that we can help, we're thankful to be in that position. And so, yeah, I think it's a great idea for parents to help subsidize their kids for a couple of years so that they live at home and they can build up worth and be in a position to be, long-term successful.
Oh, you're on mute, Tanya.
Yeah, got it. I could not agree with that more, Charles. And I actually have an 11-year-old son who I can send to you, and maybe I can convince him to live with you. Since you weren't able to convince your own, I've got an offer for you. Let's make a deal, Charles.
I think we can figure out that deal. And you guys are laughing, but it's 100% true. You do the best to raise your young people to be independent and driven to do things on their own. And that's a great thing. Right. And one of the negatives of independence is sometimes they want to bang their head against the wall their own way.
That's true.
Great. All of us have a few knots from doing it ourselves, and that's a good thing. But this is just one. If a parent, you're in a position to have that conversation with your young people and convince them to be at home for a couple of years to save money, it's a great thing. And I would have no problem with taking your young man for a while and talking to him about it. My sons agree now, but I have a son that, that's doing both, Lincoln. He's making his own capital while he's pursuing a rap and R&B career. And so he sort of works by day, does his own creative stuff at night, and wanted to do it on his own, did not want a dime from his dad. That's just, he did not. And so he's in Atlanta doing it on his own with his girlfriend and all that sort of good stuff. And it's part of what makes him happy to be able to smile at his dad and say, I'm going to do it on my own, Dad, love you.
Yeah,
that's right. That's how we want to raise them the right way so that they feel good about that. But I would say, to the extent you can do that and help that's great, because you're right, Lincoln. Too many of us come out of school with far too much debt, and it's that debt that drives us to do stuff we don't want to do.
I would add to that. I think kids, if you're not going to live at home with your parents, then what that means is you're going to have to make some sacrifices. Even if you look at that first paycheck of yours and say, wow, this is the biggest paycheck I've ever seen, this is the most money I've ever seen, that doesn't mean that you should be going and living on the Magnificent Mile in a penthouse. It means that you should go find, 3 roommates. Just because you got out of college doesn't mean that you don't need roommates. Go find 3 roommates. Go find, a living space that's affordable. Don't go buy a brand new car. Go buy a car that is a used car and is affordable. So it is incumbent upon you to don't have 4 pairs of Nike sneakers when you don't need 4 pairs of sneakers, right? And all of the brand names and all of this and all of that. This is part of how we need to reprogram ourselves and understand that stock is better than stuff and ownership is better than consumerism. We have to reprogram ourselves as individuals and as a community of people so that we can begin to reprioritize, because there are not infinite dollars in the world. Whatever that first paycheck you get is, I don't care how much it is, it will not have an infinity sign on it. And so it's really important for you to prioritize appropriately and make sure that your values are lining up with where your money is going.
So, this is. I'm gonna ask one more question, then we're gonna go. And some of the questions people have been asking in the chat, we've already been getting at, but we're gonna go through some more of those. I want to pose one more question, and this is kind of a question that's a bridge between our first session, this session, our next session. So one thing we do see is when we look at the wealth differences between Black and white, we talked about last week. For example, in Black and white households, that's what happens on average. So on average, white families have higher average wealth than Black families, more than 9 times as much or something like that. But, one thing that drives up the average is a couple billionaires or, a number of multi-billionaires can really drive that average up. So if we entirely close the wealth gap between Black and white households, that doesn't mean that we have equitable wealth distribution. Okay? So our society tends to have a concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. So one question I wanted to pose to the panel is that if we just close this wealth gap, is that done by having Black people have access to this wealthy few? Does that guarantee that we'll have broader based improvement for the majority of families, or is it that this means we'll have equity among a small few that is very wealthy? If you have any thoughts on that. And then of course, there's other questions that people have that we'll get to, so feel no obligation for everyone to have to answer this question.
I'll just say very quickly, I think it's both and. I think that closing the wealth gap relies upon having some Black billionaires who can move the needle in really important ways. And Charles gave an example earlier with respect to the election. I can give the example with respect to my own company. I have raised $6 million in 5.5 years. My white male counterparts have raised between $80 million and $600 million in the same period of time. And one of the reasons my company started to turn around is because Robert F. Smith invested in our company, and he is, one of the African-American billionaires and philanthropists. Kevin Durant, the basketball player, invested in our company, and Chris Paul, currently in the playoffs, invested in our company. And so we had people who were millionaires and billionaires who said, I'm going to invest in this Black entrepreneur because I believe in her and I believe that she's doing things that are important for our community. My point is we need some large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of enough people of color such that they can invest in really worthy projects, people, companies that are going to be instrumental in closing the wealth gap for all, because that's what Goal Setter really is focused on. How do we close the wealth gap for all? And so I don't think only having money there is enough, because then it's great, there are 10 Black billionaires who are having a fine life, and the rest of the folks who are still suffering. And so I really believe that it's a both and. We need to increase wages across the board. We need to increase investments across the board. We need to increase home ownership across the board. I was shocked that some of the students replied that the most likely thing that their friends and family members were owning was a home. I mean, I know when I was growing up, it was a car, right? I mean, most of the Black folks I knew had a car, but they didn't have a house. And we need to increase home ownership in the Black community. So yes, I think it's a both and, frankly, Damon.
Thanks.
I can maybe just chime in quickly. And it's a little bit of a radical idea, but it's in an idealistic sense that I share this. So I spent basically my entire life thinking about how do we solve these global challenges, right? We got millions of children under the age of 5 dying every year to preventable diseases and malnutrition and these types of things. And we have just the issues, right? They go on and on. We can got climate change, we got nuclear, there's everything out there, right? How do we really resolve these things? And I put together some analysis, and it would make a lot of wealthy people kind of turn over in their sleep, but there actually aren't that many people that could change the entire world. If there was a cap, because I don't think it's so much about income. I don't think it's about solving the wealth gap per se. I think it's much more about ensuring people have everything that they need and are able to live a dignified life. And how do we get there? So if you were to put a cap on wealth in the world at $250 million, which, following my math and all these kinds of things, it means that every month, the wealthiest people in the world would get about $1 million without even having to lift a finger. The nicest places in the nicest parts of the world, maybe you're talking about $100,000 a month in rent. So they're getting $1 million every month without having to do anything. We put a cap there. There are only about 14,000 people in the world, 14,000 of almost 8 billion people, 14,000. If we were to cap that and redistribute the wealth and put it into an endowment fund or something that could generate capital year after year, just like our current capitalist system works, that would turn out enough money to solve all of the UN, Millennium Development Goals and the post-Millennium Development Goals. Meaning everybody would have housing, food, healthcare, education, and you go down the list of all of the most important things for humanity in the world. And I don't care if you're Black or you're white or purple or it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor or whatever in this spectrum. The fact that everyone has everything that they need creates a much more beautiful society, I think, to live in. And the fact that it's only 14,000 people that would be kind of disrupted in this process for the benefit of 7.8 billion. It's it's something to consider. It makes really wealthy people turn over, but they have nothing to turn over about, because how are you gonna actually make that happen, right? So these are idealistic ideas, but you guys are young and ideas are powerful, and anything is kind of possible, if you will. I don't spend my time on this. Is kind of something I put together to have a conversation with this diplomat, but yeah.
I'd vote for that.
Let me make a plug right now for next week, because next week's panel is going to go deeper into these questions. If we could imagine what wealth is going to look like in the future, what would it look like? What should it look like? What is fair? What is ethical? And so we're definitely going to keep on that discussion as well next week. So for everyone, we're going to put the registration link in the chat as well. But just so everyone knows, this isn't the end of that type of discussion. We're going to pick up those types of questions again next week as well. I just put the link in the chat. Oh, and then so did Crystal. I don't know if Charles you were gonna chime in, but I'm gonna do some lightning round of some of the questions that people have as well. But do you want to go?
No, I want you to go to lightning round.
Okay, great. So let me just start off and you guys can add in or not, or we can just try to knock these out. 2 questions I'm going to actually take the liberty of responding to first. As an economist, I always get asked for financial tips, and I'm actually not a financial investor. I didn't study finance per se, so I'm always like reluctant to give people tips. But 2 of the questions that people ask: if you have, should you invest or pay down your debt first, such as student loans or mortgages? And then another question was, let's see. Do you have any, do you suggest Robinhood or E-Trade for young investors? So I'll let everyone else chime in. My 2 quick answers for that. One is, if you have sort of the type of debt that's on a credit card, unsecured debt with very high interest rates, that thing is normally going to grow for sure faster than some of the investments you're going to make. So I tend to want to pay that down first, because the investments you're going to make normally aren't going to outgrow your credit cards and things like that. Student loan debt and a mortgage, those tend to have lower interest rates. And so you can actually let those get paid down a little more slowly if they have very low interest rates. So the second follow-up to the question is, what is the interest rate? If it's high interest rate, pay it down as soon as you can. Low interest rate, actually save your money. You can maybe beat that interest rate by investing. And so it depends on the interest rate. The second thing is, should young investors do Robinhood or E-Trade? I'm going to say no. And this is why I'm going to say no. It depends on what you do. But okay, so I find investing in individual stocks very risky. Okay, so people can say, oh, I got Netflix. I bought 10 Netflix. Now that may be fun, but Netflix is very unpredictable. I find that, you want to have what we call a diversified portfolio. You're investing in a lot of things so that there's not one company that's going to drive your destiny. And so I personally tend to invest in more diversified things that are like mutual funds or indexes or what they call ETFs, but they're very broad-based. They don't jump around as much. I find picking individual winners, that's a very hard thing to do. But people may differ in the advice that they give. I don't know if anybody else wanted to chime in on those 2 questions.
I do, if I may.
Yeah,
first, think about investing and building wealth like building a house. The most important thing when you build a house is to have a really strong foundation. That's the first thing you need to have. And so what you also want to make sure is that you don't have anything that weakens your foundation. So think of credit card debt and consumerism as huge termites that can undermine your wealth and destroy your foundation. And so you want to try to, and we talked about, you already heard say you don't need 4 sneakers and all that sort of stuff. The number one thing is you want to get that credit card debt down to 0. Now, there are some entrepreneurs that had the passion, I got to get going. And because they're people of color, they can't attract capital. And so they're using credit card debt. I got it. I understand. Try not to. Try to get that credit card debt down to 0. That it is the hardest way for you to make money is by using credit card debt to fund whatever you want to do. And let me give you an example of the importance of compounding and how it can work for you or against you. What I want you to do after this meeting is go to Yahoo Finance and type in market cap of Citigroup, type in market cap of American Express, type in market cap of MasterCard. And what you're going to see is they have mega billions of stock value that they're building off of people like us using those cards when we don't need to be using them. Don't buy it until you can afford it. And once in your mind, you start getting that mindset of not buying something until you can afford it, you have power over them than them having power over you. So I say that first before we get into any sort of stock tips, because that's the first undermining of wealth. It was the Rothschild family that said the 8th wonder of the world was compounding interest. And so I just want you to know, if you got 15, 16, 17, 18, 20% interest rates on these credit cards, that's taking away your value. First thing. Second thing, Damon was 100% right in terms of starting with mutual funds. However, there are some of you on this panel and outside the panel that are watching the panel, and you are passionate about picking stocks. You are passionate about investing companies. And once you get to the point where you build, and I'm not talking about the day traders that took a 3-minute seminar and started day trading. Everyone heard me say that, right? I'm saying you're passionate. And so you've actually read the books that you need to read to gain the knowledge to be able to invest. And after this, I'll give 5 books to Damon, and it's work. To do this right is work. But if you have the passion to do that, investing in stocks is something you can definitely do. It's not dissimilar to what Tanya talked about from a real estate standpoint. You buy a multifamily house in a nice neighborhood with good schools, and you rent out 2 of the 3 and you live in one. That's going to be a safe investment. Number one thing, is it a good school? If you got a good neighborhood school around, that's going to make that real estate work. It's the same thing with investing in individual companies. Number one, you want to find good management teams. How do you find good management teams? You do something called comparable analysis. What's comparable analysis? It's exactly what you do when you go to the store and buy a shirt. It's exactly what you do when you go to the store and buy your pants and your shoes. You compare one thing to another. So comparable analysis, you compare the performance of one company versus another company in industry. You read analyst reports to find out what do the analysts think about the management teams in the industry. And when you can do that and you actually enjoy doing that, then you should invest in individual stocks. If you didn't know what an analyst was, you shouldn't be investing in individual stocks. All right. I'm sorry, I had to do that really fast.
No, great. That's it. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We had such a great conversation. We've gone up. We're actually over time. And there were a couple of questions we unfortunately didn't get to. But we are gonna. I'm gonna follow up with Charles. He mentioned some books. We're gonna share those with the scholars. I want to thank everybody for coming today. Good to see a lot of familiar names in the Zoom participant audience. Also, Lincoln, thanks for coming back and sharing time with the Institute, having been an alumni of the program. We're very proud of you. And Tanya and Charles, thanks for coming and sharing your insights as well with everyone. Thanks to Crystal for helping to organize. Dr. Boone and Mark Ellis as well for giving valuable feedback along the way. Again, we have our 3rd panel next week. So far we've had 2, not by any of my own work, but we've had 2 home runs so far with the great panelists that we've had over 2 weeks. And I think so next week we're gonna have on our panel, we're gonna have a prominent scholar from a think tank. We're gonna have someone who runs a foundation, who works at the MacArthur Foundation and literally decides who gets to become a genius. And we're gonna have an economist who's the head economist for the AFL-CIO and also an economist from Howard University. So we're gonna have a great panel talk about the future of wealth. Thanks everyone for joining us this week. We'll see you next week. Thank you again to our panelists. It's been a pleasure having you all. I'm gonna play a little elevator music as you guys log off, but once again, thanks everybody for joining us today.